Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Levy lecture. We have a special treat for you today. We are going to have a really fun afternoon. A couple of let me just preface today by asking you, please, everyone should turn up the volume on their device, your laptop, your phone, your iPad, whatever you're listening to. We have a lot of music, and you will experience it in the fullest way if your volume's turned up. Also, I'm going to ask for your patience because we're going to have a couple of seconds of transitions as we go from leaving the conversation to queuing up the music or going to a film clip. It's all been rehearsed, it's all lined up. It's all been professionally organized, but this isn't magic. So I know there were a few complaints last week, and someone suggested that we hire someone on staff to handle all our technical arrangements. All of us here at the foundation are volunteers. I am a volunteer. We offer an honorarium to our speakers, but we're all, were you able to hear what I was just saying?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm just letting you know, manage your expectations. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be nearly perfect. I want to thank Levy Senior Center Foundation for their amazing sponsorship. Without their support, we would not be able to bring these lectures to you. I also want to thank our corporate sponsor, Amador Evanston, who has been incredibly generous and a constant source of support for us the past 12 months when we've been offering lectures weekly or bi-weekly. They're extra costs. We had lots of additional expenses, and without Amador's support, we probably would not have been able to do as many. Amador, if you've tuned in before, you know it's a new building on Oak Street in Evanston. It's a beautiful building for people who are transitioning from a house to someplace else. If you don't want the commitment of buying, rentals are available starting at $18.85. They also have, there's flexible special opening pricing, flexible lease timing. They also have a few apartments available through community partners for affordable housing. Ask Maddie if that's something you're interested in. They have great amenities. It's going to be getting warmer. The pool will be open, lots of outdoor entertaining spaces, fitness and wellness programs all year round, and everything is, of course, flexible and safe with pandemic protocols. Hopefully, most of you are getting vaccinated, and we will be coming out of this experience within the next several months. Okay, so let me tell you about John. John, hang on just one second. Let me pull up the other screen. Okay. So John is an Emmy-winning director, producer, and editor. In 2006, he was nominated for a Grammy for his direction of Brian Wilson Presents Smile, hence the Beach Boys music, prior to us starting this afternoon. He has worked, Brian Wilson's Smile was the fourth of 6 collaborative efforts they worked on together. Other directorial projects that John has worked on include Born in Chicago, a documentary about the Chicago Blues, Lay In Bluesland, a documentary about the legendary blues drummer, and Horn from the Heart, the Paul Butterfield Story, a documentary about the Chicago bluesman. He's also working on, his current project is on the Manhattan Transfer, and he'll spend some time talking to us about that as well. So without any further ado, welcome, John. Take it away.
Thank you, Wendy. Did you say you had some stills you wanted me to put up and talk about?
Okay, let's start with Bonnie Raitt. She's beautiful. She
is. She is. This was while we were making the film Horn from the Heart, the Paul Butterfield Story. She was a fan of Paul's, and she was kind of coming up when he was big in late 70s. She opened some shows for him, really called him the greatest blues harmonica she ever played with. This was in Mill Valley, California, probably 2016, photo by Julie Bloor-Bizot. I don't know why I have my glasses off. I must have been trying to make her think I could see or something. But
I don't know. You look good together. And that white streak, that's natural in her hair, right?
I believe it is. Wow. Yes.
Yeah, she's gorgeous. Okay, so next photo, please. James Cotton.
James Cotton. There's James Cotton. Unbelievably warm-hearted blues man, songwriter, singer, harmonica player. This was for the film Lay In Bluesland. They were in bands together. And this was in about 2014 in Evanston at the Orrington Hotel. And there was his wife, Jackie. It was a great day. And he passed away a few years after that. But his spirit lives on. And man, if you want to hear one James Cotton song to get you hooked, go to Good Time Charlie. Okay, that's the only recommendation of the whole show. And I know you wanted this one too.
Yeah, look at that. Brian Wilson on the left of the screen, and Elvis Costello.
Starting with Elvis, he's probably my favorite artist that has come out since he came out, which would be what, about 78? This was 98 in, I skipped the person who took the earlier James Cotton photos was Frank Crockmull. And this one was taken by Maggie McGee in June of 98 at Brian's house in Beverly Hills. I've loved Elvis for 42 years, but I've loved Brian for much longer. His band, the Beach Boys, was really they were my first musical heroes. It all started for me with Brian and the Beach Boys. Really, I started becoming cognizant of music in about 62 when I was 8, and we were living in San Francisco. And, the Beach Boys were our band. Those singles that came out before the Beatles happened, I'm thinking Surfin' Safari, Surfin' USA, and then Surfer Girl. They just hit me. I had a turntable. My dad had built one from a Heath kit that he bought at Radio Shack. This big honking thing, mono, of course, but that's all singles were anyway, and that's all that I bought. And I would put my head up against that speaker and listen to those 3 songs. And but there was another record in his collection that I liked just as much in my dad's collection. He had about 5 LPs. 2 of them were the sound of trains going by. One of them was called
a whole other webinar.
Was called Homer and Jethro's Zany Songs of the 30s. And this thing, it just cracked me up. It was recorded in 63. They're doing these fractured versions of songs, that I didn't know the first time around, but something about the way they were just combining the cracked musicianship with subtly humorous and nutty lyrics. I loved it. And, as the Cleaning Ladies, my band developed a few years later, I think perhaps we're the Homer and Jethro of rock and roll. They definitely have always had an influence on me. I want to do a mashup here.
Flatfoot flugy with a fly, fly. Flatfoot flugy with a fly, fly. Flatfoot flugy with a fly, 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 fly. I'm an old cowhand, from the Rio Grande. But my legs ain't bold, and my cheeks ain't tan. I'm a cowboy who never saw a cow, never roped a steer cause I don't know how, and I sure ain't fixin' to start it now. Yippee-I-O-ki-yay.
To a 9-year-old, this is pure gold.
I know all the songs that the cowboys know about the big corral where the doggies go, cause I learned them all on the video. Yippee-I-O-ki-yay. Yippee-I-O-ki-yay.
Homer and Jethro had Evanston roots. Jethro Burns lived in Evanston, I think, for most of his life. His son, Johnny, a great musician in his own right, who played with John Prine and played once with my band, the Cleaning Ladies. Yeah, I became a lifelong fan of Homer and Jethro. I got to plug my headphones back in.
Okay.
There we go. But then things changed, you know, back to 63 in California, the Beatles happened. All right. She Loves You. I Want to Hold Your Hand. It was a landslide. You know, it kind of felt like somebody was taking over from our home band's territory. You know, how can you do this to our Beach Boys, but how could you not love the Beatles? And of course, they went on to have a head-to-head competition with the Beach Boys that lasted for years.
Really, I did not know that.
Yeah, well, John and Paul considered Brian to be their top competition.
Wow, that's so interesting. Can you elaborate on that? I never knew that.
Well, yeah, you know,
it was totally different.
Yes, but around the time of Rubber Soul, that really struck Brian deeply. He responded to it with music. They responded with Revolver. Then came Pet Sounds, and then, you know, Brian was working on Smile, and you know, the Beatles would buy the records when they came out and listen to them, and you know, they were public about it. They did love Brian. And then they did, you know, while Brian was preparing Smile, which went off the rails, the Beatles kind of beat him to the punch with Sgt. Pepper. There was a moment where I was in the same room with the two of them, Paul and Brian.
Were there fisticuffs involved?
Just hugging, and seriously, it's the biggest love fest, especially, well, it's both ways, but Paul is much more effusive. Brian was getting inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in June of 2000 at the Waldorf Astoria, I think it was, in New York City. I was sort of his right-hand cameraman at that point, documenting much of what he did, and I came with my little camera. And Paul had said he might show up to induct. I think it wasn't official. Anyway, make a long story short, by the time things got going, I'm sitting at an adjacent table from Paul's, and as we're both facing the day that he showed up, as we're both facing the stage, he's right next to me. I mean, it's like he's the partner to my right. And he gives me an elbow and he says, "Oh, what's your name then?" I said, "John." So it's my favorite name. I kid you not. You couldn't write a movie like this, I know. The night just got better from there. He's pouring the wine and he's clinking the jewels. Clinking the silverware, and it was a rocking night. And then, sure enough, came time. They saved Brian for last. A lot of the people in the place didn't know that Paul was there because they had kind of spirited him in during a break. They say, now to induct Brian Wilson, Paul McCartney. You should have heard the shrieks. My God, this is an older crowd. This is the Henry Mancini crowd back then. It's gotten a little younger. A shriek like Shea Stadium. People rush the stage. I mean, people in wheelchairs. I mean, people are rushing the stage. I'm getting my camera ready. I go up and, you know, my heart is going. Let me play the clip. I'll show you the clip that I shot that you can kind of see my heart beat.
In the 60s, particularly, he wrote some music that, when I played it, it made me cry. And I don't quite know why. It wasn't necessarily the words or the music. There's just something so deep in it. I think it's a sign of great genius to be able to do that with a bunch of words and a bunch of notes. So, thank you, sir, for everything you've done for me, for making me cry, for having that thing you can do with your music. You just put those notes, those harmonies together, stick a couple of words over the top of it, and you've got me any day. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Wilson.
There it is. It was one of those moments. Later that night, I was working with, let me get back there. I had Brian's backup acceptance speech. It had been co-written with David Leaf, and I had it in my pocket in case Brian lost it. There it is. Here's the first page of it. Of course, I couldn't help myself. I had to have Paul sign it. So there it is. It's a beautiful thing. And later on, I had Brian sign page 2, which I think I scanned this before that happened. But this is, you know, my favorite piece of rock and roll memorabilia. There he is. My favorite name.
So we talked about this yesterday when we were I watched your movie Smile, and I watched the documentary and read about Brian Wilson, and he's considered a genius among musical people who know about music, other musicians. Can you talk about that?
He is. He is. I mean, how can you not feel it? It's just, it does hit you deeper, and it rocks you harder. I mean, it goes from the choir to the, you know, the fun of and the abandon of fun, 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 from God Only Knows to fun, fun, fun. That's a long way. Bob Dylan, has some amazing quote about him about how they should put his ear in the Smithsonian or something like that. He's so unaware of it. I mean, honestly, he's so unaffected by it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. He's really like a big, innocent, open guy.
And that you were saying that when other musicians meet him, they're like tongue-tied. And
yes, they are. At the Grammys in 2006, Brian didn't go to the party they had the night before, but I was in the courtyard where all the nominees were, and I think all the past winners were, and just having a great time. And I'm being hugged suddenly by, I can see it's a man. It looks like a man. It's a smaller man. He's giving me a hug, and feels like he's sobbing. Okay, what have I done? What have I done? No, it wasn't that. It was Jack Bruce of Cream, who they were getting a Lifetime Achievement Award that year, and he just asked me to pass that on to Brian. I kid you not.
Wow, unbelievable.
But meanwhile, it's back in '63 in California, right? And then let's go forward to '64. A Hard Day's Night comes out. I go to see it, I think, at the Mount Tamalpais Theater. There's a block.
You're talking about the movie, not the song.
I'm sorry, yeah, the movie.
Okay.
And that really separated, the Beatles from the rest of the world and from the Beach Boys. Line around the block, got in. They turned the movie on, and like lemmings, we all got up from our seats, ran up onto the stage, and tried to touch our favorite Beatle. I didn't expect to do that, okay? But I'm up there. I'm chasing Paul, all right? I'm chasing Paul. Now, a couple of years later, after I broke my nose, I looked more like John, and John was my favorite. But at this point, Paul was my favorite. It was pandemonium. They stopped the film. They made us go back to our seats. They said they're not going to start it again until we sit down. They start the film. We get up again, and we can't control it. And we know they got to keep the movie going because there's a line around the block. It was then that I kind of put it together that movies and music, that was a good combination. And really, the rest of my life has been about that. Mixing a little bit of humor like A Hard Day's Night did, and you've really got something.
Wow. I've never heard of any kind of visceral response to a movie like that.
Plus, you're 10 years old, you're running around the stage, you're bumping into girls once in a while. That's not the worst thing in the world, So a lot of positives associated with the whole experience.
Okay. I know that your brother had an 8mm camera that you got a hold of and started using.
Yes, silent camera, Kodak, you'd shoot it and send it to Kodak, and they'd send it back processed. Frustrating, the silentness of it all. I got addicted. They threw out a dictaphone machine at his office that they thought was broken, that wasn't broken. So it was this coiled thing, like an old-fashioned tape recorder, that I thought was going to be my breakthrough with sound, because you had a microphone on it and you could record the sound. But then, of course, you had to play the sound back at the same speed as the picture, and it became a big pain in the neck. And then a couple of years later, Kodak started, when you would send them your raw film, they would send it back processed, and they would put a magnetic audio stripe on it, and you could put it, if you had the right projector, which we did, you could put a microphone into that, and you had one shot at recording a soundtrack that would be in sync, with your film. So of course I would make my films, and then I'd have all my people lined up to try to do the sounds, the music and the talking and the sounds live. It was a big mess.
When all this was going on?
This was up to 12 and 13, we made mostly juvenile films, and it was very frustrating. No masterpieces. And then next year, 65, tragedy occurred.
Tell me.
My family moved from San Francisco to Philadelphia.
Well, as a girl who was born in Philly, that's not so tragic.
Oh, no offense.
None.
It was kind of like moving back in time, but you hardly noticed it at that age. There was so much good music happening, the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and the Kinks and the who am I leaving out? I mean, there was just so much great music on the radio in Philly. I'm older than you.
The Philly
Well, there
sound.
was the Philly sound too. I was young and I was more into rock and roll. I was listening to WDAS. That was one of the two great FM stations, and FM was exploding. It felt like anything was possible. The songs from one to the next on the FM station were completely different, and it was just liberating, as a listener, and I'm sure as an artist it was too. So there was MMR and DAS, and of course we had Wibbage on the AM with Joe Niagara. There was good radio happening, but there was no place in Philly to see these bands. The Spectrum would have an occasional cavalcade of stars, but then they opened the Electric Factory in '68, and that changed everything for me. That was kind of, a small club, probably 200 or 300 people. You sat on the floor on the same circuit as the place in town here, the Kinetic Playground, which was owned by Aaron Russo, who will appear in the show, the program a little later, related to the Manhattan Transfer. So starting in February of '69, my friend Chuck Taylor and I, and later on Charlie Millman and others, would go to the factory. They had all ages shows on the weekends sometimes. Canned Heat, Flying Burrito Brothers with Graham Parsons, Steppenwolf. We were going by and they were doing the sound check, and we went in and nobody kicked us out, and we got to watch Steppenwolf rehearse, workout Magic Carpet Ride. Are you kidding? I saw Hendrix at the Spectrum. You went to some shows at the Spectrum. Saw him with my sister Kathy. And then 2 weeks before Woodstock, August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, I went with some older friends to the Atlantic City Pop Festival. This was before casinos, of course, and they had it at a horse race track called the Atlantic City Racetrack, and they had 3/4 of the same acts that you had at Woodstock, along with a lot of other ones. It was, Jefferson Airplane and Mothers of Invention and Procol Harum and Joe Cocker and Three Dog Night. It was just 3 days of peace and love and campgrounds and a lot of things I'd never seen before. But that was good. And I'm going on here. Sorry.
Things you hadn't seen before musically, or are you talking like
culturally?
Oh. Gotcha.
And then Paul Butterfield was one of the highlights of that weekend. I wasn't into the blues as much at that point, and he brought me in. It was just an intense set, as intense as anything we saw that weekend. Burning seemed to have no commercial sense. I mean, no sense of the audience. He was just facing the band with his back to us, and it was the horns, and I was 100 yards away, but you could, as they say, you could feel the hair blowing back. It was, I think everybody was stunned by how good Paul was. And 50 years later, I would be lucky enough to work on a film about him. So anyway.
Great. Okay.
A couple of weeks after Atlantic City, I was visiting my sister Carol in Schenectady. We saw a sign on the poster, on the advertising banner of this little bar that said, "Tonight, Led Zeppelin." August 20th, 1969. I thought it was probably a joke, but we got in line anyway. My buddy Dave Symes and I at about 10 in the morning, and sure enough, who shows up?
Join you?
Huh?
Did your sister join you?
No, I really, I don't know why she didn't. But we, about noon or a little later, the station wagon pulled into the parking lot. Nobody got out. I was feeling brazen. We were the only people in line. I went over and I knocked on the window, and John Paul Jones rolled down the window, and I said, "Are you guys Led Zeppelin?" And he said, "No, man, they went that away." And I was polite in those days, so I let him put the window up, and I smelled something coming out of the car that I'd smelled at Atlantic City. I didn't know. I didn't understand. I saw the Who, and I took the camera in, and that was a big deal to bring a camera in. So let me just get this up. Brought my dad's Polaroid, which was a big freaking deal. It folded out, and so there. Is that it? Are you seeing it?
I am.
Okay. There's Roger Daltrey, and you can see we're sitting at their feet. There's Keith Moon on the right and Wilson on the left. It was powerful. They were debuting Tommy. It was beyond belief. It was $4 or $5. There's Pete. I would interview him in '99.
Did you share these pictures?
No, I hadn't refound these pictures at the time that I met him, and I didn't think I was going to interview him anyway. That was just kind of a lucky thing.
Commercial everything was then.
Yeah.
Compared to how it is now.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So, we saw the Stones. I went to about a week after the Who in October of '69. I'm getting more brazen. I've got the tape recorder this time. I mean, the camera at the last show. I rented a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Kid you not, ran on these big honking batteries, had big reels. Anyway, I stuck the thing under my coat and went to see the band at the Philadelphia Academy of Music. That was a classic show. And the Stones, of course, came in November, which was, it was just, if you were a music fan, a rock music fan, there was nothing like it. My brother-in-law says the same thing about the 50s. So, God love us.
And kudos to your parents for giving you enough free rein to follow them.
That's right. To get on the train at Chestnut Hill and go down to the city of Philadelphia, we would go to Sansom Street, was it, where the hippie section was, where all the head shops were, and the incense, and we'd spend an hour doing that. Yeah, it was. It really was trusting of them. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, back to your baseball question. I was playing baseball. This is you're a
well-rounded person, not just a musical product.
Well, I stopped being well-rounded after this year.
Okay.
But last year I played baseball. Then I became very unwell-rounded. But up till '72, I played baseball. I played American Legion in Philadelphia in the White Marsh League. And our coach for 2 years in '70 and '71 was the winningest pitcher in the National League in the 1950s. And I don't know. I only threw this in because I thought, I wonder if there are people out there who know what this is and want to get involved in the chat and do that sort of.
Our audience is very smart, so I'm going to.
You can't look it up.
Anyone, if you think you know,
who was the winningest?
Send it in through the Q&A or the chat, and we'll come back to this, and I'll let you know if anyone guesses correctly.
Another point: he was in fact the winningest pitcher who threw with this arm, which I'm not going to tell you, of both leagues. In other words, the person in the other league who had the most wins, which was one more, threw with the other arm. Okay.
And this was when the Phillies were decent in the 1950s.
Yeah,
60s.
Yeah, that was a clue. That was a good clue. Yes. I didn't say though that he played for the Phillies. He may or may not have played for the Phillies.
Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, I finally bought a tape recorder. I bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I started recording folk acts and rock acts in the neighborhood for a little bit of extra money. And then in '72, I came here to Chicago to go to Northwestern. And
you graduated high school and you were accepted to college.
They let me out. Yes, they let me out.
Were you accepted into any other colleges?
Yes, the big schools then for radio, TV, film were Syracuse, I think UCLA. I took a tour here by myself one day, and my student guide didn't show up, and who comes around the corner but Charles Hunter, who was the head of the radio, TV, film department, and I didn't know it, who gave me the most incredible tour of the school, and I said, I got to come here. So he sold me on, and it was a good choice. There was,
Great.
You could get your hands on the equipment. I had some good teachers. Got a job at the radio station where I had a show. I made a show called Rough Cut, where I would go into the clubs, the folk and blues and rock clubs on the Friday and Saturday nights and record the shows, and then I'd play them on Sunday night. A lot of great artists, mainly Chicagoans like Tom Dundee or Ginny Clemens or Bonnie Kolak, but also people like Utah Phillips and Phil Ochs. But I don't really know if I had any listeners because nobody really ever called. It was a small station. It was 1,000 watts at that time, 1,040 watts, mono, barely got into Rogers Park. One night, I was on probably 9 to 11 Sunday nights. I said, in the middle of a campus, I said, I'm going to give the first caller $10. Nothing. So, if you have a radio show in the forest, well, you know what I'm trying to say. I don't know if anybody really ever knew about my radio show, but it was fun, and I met a lot of great people like Wally Podrazik and Mark Gunshin and Flawn Williams and Benj Canters, so I can't complain. And my recording of Steve Goodman at the Old Town, at the Earl of Old Town in '73 came out about 5 or 10 years ago. It's called Don't Blame Me. My relationship with Steve would become relevant 25 years later when I started working with John Prine, but we'll get to that.
getting back to baseball, we've had some incorrect guesses. Not Whitey Ford, not Steve Carlton, not Cy Young. We also, we have some viewer feedback from someone named Charlie Millman.
Oh, good. I know Charlie.
John, correction.
Uh-oh.
When we saw the band, you did not stick your reel-to-reel under your coat. You had me stick it under my coat. He was wearing a big green army jacket.
Charlie, thank you for tuning in. You're so right. Wow. I hope nobody else I'm telling stories about is listening.
Then I got out of college and I got a job working the sound at the First National Bank in Chicago. They had a plaza concert every weekday where they would bring in people like Danny Davis and the Nashville Brass and Sergio Mendez to do these afternoon lunchtime shows. And a few hundred people would eat their sandwiches and watch them. And I did the sound mixing for that. And the bank had a talent show and I passed the audition, which meant that on the last day of the season, I got to perform on this stage that I had been doing the sound on. And I was really into country then, and I'd been writing these country songs. And I, played my 2 half-decent songs and got a little bit of a reaction, so I couldn't complain. And then I saw an ad in the paper that said, looking for singer-songwriters and, looking for the next Joni Mitchell or James Taylor. So I thought, okay, I can do that, kind of a countrified James Taylor. And my hair's about the same. So I showed up at this high-rise downtown, went into this room where there were 5 or 6 other people, 3 girls who looked just like Joni Mitchell and 2 other guys who looked just like me, who looked just like James Taylor. And we were tuning our guitars and, keeping to ourselves nervously. And I was last in line. And one at a time, they'd go in and I guess audition, and they'd come out distraught. I mean, the 5 people before me, if not crying. Huh?
Crying?
The men were crying. Finally, it was my turn. So, I'd been tuning my guitar. It should have been in tune by then. And I went in and they directed me to this room with a middle-aged guy in a coat and tie. And he said, what do you got for me? And I played my 2 half-decent songs. He called this other guy into the office, played them again, my 2 good songs. I think they assumed I had a lot of good songs. And they said, this is great. You're just what we're looking for. Would you like to be an AMRC, American Music Recording Company recording artist? Honestly. Well, I said, where do I sign? And I signed. And thanks to... Actually, I did. I gave it to my teacher, Dana Hodgdon's brother, Rusty. And he read it for me and said, seems to be legit enough. I mean, he didn't say run away, and that was all I needed to hear. I had to borrow money from Dana and from my friend Michael O'Brien to make ends meet at that time. But I got down to Cincinnati, where they took me down to record 2 sides of a single with this really cracked session band. The songs were called Nickels and Dimes and Disappear. They turned out pretty well. I think they pressed up 300 copies and sent them to country stations around the country. And, the next day my country career died. But, I've got a 45 to show for it. And I remember when I got that recording contract I don't know if it was related, but I suddenly started wearing my seatbelt then. Back to Northwestern, I skipped something, which was I met this great professor, David Noon, in the School of Music. He's a noted composer. And back then, everything was segregated. You couldn't take schools in the sociology department if you were in anthropology, blah, blah, blah. So I couldn't take any schools supposedly in the School of Music, but he pulled some strings and suddenly I could take all the courses I wanted. And I wanted to take all the music theory and composition that I could. So I did with John Bucheri. I remember he was one of my teachers, and I took electronic music with Steven Siverud. So anyway, I thank David Noon for that one.
And Rich Norman wins the prize. The correct answer to the baseball question is Robin Roberts. Congratulations, Rich Norman.
He was probably only about 45 or 46 in 71. And he was, he showed up as the coach. We didn't know he was going to be our coach. And he was pitching batting practice. And I thought, I can hit this old guy. I'd seen him getting knocked around the last 3 years of his pro career. So anyway, an over-the-hill pro was overpowering. He threw me, he said, Johnny, I'm going to throw you a pitch. I'm getting off topic here. I'm sorry. But he said, I'm going to show you a pitch you've never seen before. I thought, okay, old man, bring it on. Goes into this big slow windup, throws this pitch It starts, I'm right-handed, he's right-handed. It starts honestly 2 feet outside. It comes back in, goes across the plate. It was a screwball. I'd never seen a screwball before. And I just left the bat on my shoulder, and he threw 3 of those to me in a row, and then he told me to sit down. But anyway, it was a thrill having a guy who became a Hall of Famer as our baseball coach.
Do you know what that story reminds me of? Bull Durham.
Yeah. But I got the bug, so I was writing songs, and in '78, I put a band together to record them, and it was called the Cleaning Ladies. And it was Art Collins on guitar, and Scott Brewer on bass, and Pete Ski on drums. And we recorded a song about paraquat, which was the scourge of our nation at that time. And I sent the cassette to WXRT, and I kid you not, 2 days later, they called it a pick-to-click, and it was in light rotation, which meant it got played maybe every other day for a while. And, suddenly we were on the map, and that was all we really needed. That's all the encouragement we needed. We're still at it 43 years later.
That's amazing.
Now with Daniel T. Sticks on drums. But anyway, we'll get more to the Cleaning Ladies later. In '82, I was working at a great place in Glenview, television production company called Telemation. Borrowed a couple of cameras and took them to shoot a concert and an interview with a guy who had in '68 recorded the great unsung masterpiece of the year of many masterpieces. I don't know how this fell through the cracks. And this was before he got married on the Johnny Carson show. And I'm talking about,
who it is?
that's right, of course, it's Tiny Tim.
Yeah.
So we hit it off.
Did he have long hair, and did he look the same?
Yes, he did. And think about it. This was '82. He was born in '34. He was only 48. I mean, I thought of him as such an old man. He was only, when he married Miss Vicky, he was only 34 to 69, 35. So he wasn't that old a man. I thought of him as being really old, but he was really young at heart. And maybe I should just, do you want to see a clip?
Sure. Does anyone remember watching them get married on Johnny Carson?
Chicago, Chicago, a heck of a town, Chicago, Chicago, I'll show you around, why, bet you bought $1.
Elizabeth Taylor. I met her on September 17th, 1947 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the St. Regis Hotel on the 15th floor. You don't forget those things.
Then the skies will seem more blue down in Lover's Lane, my dearie.
I met Groucho Marx. He said to me, never marry a woman unless she looks like you. Like a rolling stone. When I met him, I was working with Mr. Yarrow in that movie called You Are What You Eat in the Electric Circus down in the Village. And the band, his band called The Band, first were getting to know him, and they had heard of me from the underground and wanted to play in the picture for nothing, and they played behind me. So he asked them if I liked to visit him in Woodstock. This was '67 of January. And I said, oh, I love it. Are you kidding? Got there about 10:30 at night, surrounded by trees. You could never find the place. And then I went behind my shopping bag, my cosmetics with me, and a couple of bananas.
And ukulele?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And he showed me a room upstairs. The room had no shower, but it had a bathtub in there with a shower hose, so I could take my shower that way. So then I was sitting in the foyer with this big man, the biggest man in the industry at the time, next to Presley. And I said to him, Mr. Dylan, you are today to the folk business what Rudy Valley was in 1929 to this country, to the popular songs. He said, Mr. Tim, he called me to tell me about Mr. Valley. I said, Mr. Dylan, supposing Mr. Valley were here today in his heyday. He was looking at me as I was describing these things. Here's how I feel he would sing your number through the megaphone. How does it feel to be on your own, a complete unknown, like a rolling stone? And then I said, Mr. Dylan, supposing you were alive in 1929, here's how I feel you would be singing his number. My time is your time. Your time is my time. We just seem to synchronize and sympathize. We're harmonizing one step and two step, old step and new step. There's no time like our time and no one like you. He said to me, would you like a banana before you go to bed? I said, no, thank you. I said, I have my own. I'm on the highway to hell. Next door there might be somebody. I'm on the highway, living easy, living free. I better watch that. I didn't know that.
If you're that quiet, it'll be all right.
Oh, I'm on the living easy, living free. Ticket on a one-way ride. La la did it, la la did it, did it. I did it. I'm on the highway to hell. Ooh, I'm on the highway to hell.
Do you consider him to be musically significant?
Yes. Oh, most definitely.
And why?
He was a human jukebox. He was a musicologist of the highest degree of American music, going back to the turn of the century. He could tell you every artist, every record. Not only that, but he can sing every song they sang in perfect pitch. He never missed a note. He had a beautiful, his gimmick was his falsetto, but his full voice was beautiful. And he also played kind of an important role in the history of rock and roll, in as much as when he got his gig in '66 at the, is my sound okay, by the way? He got a gig at Steve Paul's The Scene in New York City, doing 5 or 6 minutes between big rock acts. The Doors were big fans. They gave him the song People Are Strange to record before it got famous. And the band were fans, and everybody knew that he had something, and it wasn't a put on. He was truly that, respectful of people, and he was just a gentle soul.
Okay, great. I'm glad you explained that.
And he was innocent without being naive. You know what I mean? He'd seen the worst of life. He lived in his mother's apartment after he went down, and he really lost Miss Vicky, of course, and had a couple of other marriages. But it wasn't, it could have been a sad life, but he looked at the bright side. And the greatest rock biography I've ever done was of him. I think it's called Tiny Tim, and it's by a guy called Harry Stein.
Was he given professional recognition?
By the people who knew, yeah. Most people thought of him as a novelty and as a freak, and they dismissed him. He was never, and he didn't make any more great records either after that first one with the great Richard Perry producing. But it's good that he exists in the American psyche, really is.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Because my impression before you just explained that was just that he was odd. And so I'm glad to know that there was more to it than that.
Want to hear my Bob Dylan story?
Yeah, of course.
We're here. We got the lights and everything, and I've got my hair, my wig on straight. Well, it was October 31st, 2000. He played at McGaw Hall in Evanston, and I went with my friend Maggie McGee, and it was one of those great shows, and he was getting in toward the end. I think he might have started playing Blowing in the Wind, and we started to leave, and then we saw the area that he might walk by on his way out, so we decided to stand over by it and perhaps, touch the hem of his garment. And sure enough, he came around the corner, and he breaks into this big smile, surrounded by bodyguards. He breaks through them and comes over and shakes my hand. And I'm there shaking Bob Dylan's hand. And I think he realized in the midst of the handshake that I wasn't the person that he thought I was. But we didn't care. We continued the handshake, and we continued the conversation, I must say, as though we knew each other. I'll repeat it to you sometime, but it was kind of nonsensical. And then people had gathered by now, and they thought that we knew each other. And as he's leaving, so he says, "You got anything for me?" And realizing now what he was trying to say was, did I have anything for him to autograph? Which I didn't, but I did have a card in my back pocket. So I pulled it out and handed it to him, and he looked at it real hard, and then he said, "Thanks, man, I've been needing one of these." And then he exited stage right and got on the bus. And since then, purely coincidentally, he's been very very helpful with just giving me music and footage for my films. But that was something else. I have witnesses.
That's a good story.
Should we do a little bit about the cleaning ladies?
Sure.
It was 84, and I was working at a great place called Post Effects, and we were doing special effects, and we made a video called She Won't French Kiss.
And how did you come up with the name?
We thought it would lend itself to some visual opportunities, and it did. You know, we dressed up the stage like a cleaning closet, and we put the amplifiers in spick and span boxes and Tide boxes, and the microphone stands were in vacuum cleaner hoses, and it was kind of a whole thing that became too cumbersome to do. We spelled it Lady's, you know, in homage to the Beatles and the Monkees, I suppose. I'm not sure it was the best choice of names because it kind of, it kind of pigeonholed us, but, you know, we're going to dwell on the positive tonight.
Mesdames et messieurs, elle ne sait pas comment ouvrir la bouche. Un, deux, trois, quatre.
This put us on the map. It won a bunch of awards. It was played on MTV. It kept us from having to, you know, play our guts out in the clubs every single weekend.
I met a French girl on a hotel terrace. This American male got lost in Paris. First she took me to the Eiffel Tower. I stared at each other for over an hour. Then we took a walk by the Seine. This American boy was falling in love again and again. The French girl took me all around the town. I followed her home and then I found she won't French kiss, she won't French kiss. How would a Frenchman cope with this? She won't French kiss, said she won't French kiss.
We were becoming the Homer and Jethro of rock and roll. But anyway, we made a second video then called Creatures from Outer Space. It was nominated for this big award at the time called the International Monitor Awards. So I went. They had the thing at Lincoln Center in New York City. I brought my mother. I rented a tux. Scott Brewer, our bassist, came. My cousin Carl came. We sat in the audience. Down the row from me, we were up against Yes for something. We were up against Don Henley. You know, to hear our name against theirs was very funny. It got a little chuckle. Down the row, as I say, is Don Henley. He's got his little mirror going and he's doing his makeup. And the other John Anderson, the guy from Yes, is practicing his acceptance speech. And anyway, then they say, ladies and gentlemen, the winner is the cleaning ladies. And I went up and I got my award from Steve Allen. And I had dinner with Dick Cavett. And then we did another video. This is it, Infatuation. We won MTV's Basement Tapes. We were on a freaking roll. We were getting offers coming in over the phone. We got a new expensive manager, and he kind of liked our serious stuff and suggested that we stay in the serious realm. We listened, you know, a little too long. I started wearing leather pants.
And things went off the rails for a few years there. But we regained our footing in the 90s.
Your mother must have been very proud.
Yes, she was. She was. I mean, we were sitting with, there were daytime soap opera stars there. It was really kind of an older crowd of TV people. They had just started to do music video awards.
And Dick Cavett must have been fascinating.
Yes, he was the life of the party.
So does the fact that you're a musician help you in your line of work, making musical documentaries?
I think it helps. I think, you know, being together for 43 years, you know how things fit together. Musically and person-wise. And of course, I think it helps me understand how the people who really know how to do it. Yeah, I think it does. And it even sometimes has some practical applications. You know, right after we did She Won't French Kiss, Dick Meyer, the president of Jovan, and Rich Tufo were shopping around this idea to make the Super Bowl Shuffle. And they had written it and recorded it. And this was before the playoffs had even begun. And I think they may have seen a snippet of She Won't French Kiss on the Post Effects demo reel, and they brought the edit into our company, and I got to edit the Super Bowl Shuffle, and our company got a whole bunch of good work out of it, you know, subsequently. So, yeah, it helps.
Can you talk about how you learned to interview people?
Well, I'm not sure I've got it down yet, but I'll tell you that I learned a lot I worked for Bill Curtis and Donna LaPietra for 6 years. And Bill Curtis, you know, the keys to him seem to be learn the subject as well as your subject knows it, your interviewee knows it. 2, let him know that you've learned this and you're as enthused about it as he is. And 3, know when to shut up. And because, once you do that, people get going and it just flows. So, that works with musicians. I get hired sometimes to interview corporate type people, and the same rules apply.
So then you got, I believe we're up to the part where you got a call from Brian Wilson.
Yes.
In February of 1998. So how did Brian find you, seek you out, and talk about that?
The Cleaning Ladies had worked in the mid-'80s with the producer Joe Thomas and engineer Frank Pappalardo. Joe was co-producing Brian's comeback album, and Brian had moved to St. Charles at that time, and they were making his record. Frank was engineering it. They remembered that I loved the Beach Boys and made music videos, so they invited me out to meet him and see if I might be able to do the videos for him. Next day, I got all dressed up, just short of a tie, and drove out to St. Charles and knocked on the buzzer, rang the buzzer. Brian Wilson's voice comes through. Okay, this is real now. Hey, John, great, come on in. I can't impersonate him, but he's got kind of a high voice. I come in, it's only him. He's sitting there at the console, the mixing console. He's choosing, that you're working on a song called She Says That She Needs Me. He was choosing between some synth strings that he had going or some real strings, and he asked my opinion, okay? Brian Wilson is asking my opinion on how to do something. So, of course, I told him go with the real strings, and then they had queued up the song that the Cleaning Ladies had recorded with Joe and Frank. It was called Guardian Angel, this big Brian homage, really, and played it real loud over the speakers. And Brian, you could tell Brian liked it, and he started doing this little dance I call the Yogi Bear. And that was the way it was. And then we went out to dinner at the Baker Hotel, I think it is, in St. Charles, and we're sitting around the table, and Brian's not sitting yet. And then we sit down, and then he sits down to my right, and everybody across the table is giving me the thumbs up, like, that really means, that's really a good sign. And Brian goes to the bathroom, and they say, that's the ear he can hear out of. He's deaf in his right ear, and he does that if he wants to hear what you're saying. So, I was in. And we've gone on to make 6 films, like you say. We've done Brian Wilson's Imagination, Brian Wilson on Tour, Pet Sounds Live in London, Smile. I did the performance that he did of that feature film, Love and Mercy, where he did the title song, and then I co-directed and co-edited and co-wrote the Beach Boys 50th anniversary show called Doing It Again. A very special thanks to Maggie McGee for producing all of the Brian Wilson work that we've done. Thank you, Maggie.
The food I eat and the exercise I do also keeps me in good shape too. I run at a park. I own the park. I claimed it. It's called the Holmby Park. I call it the Brian Wilson Park. I own that park. Hold it back like this and go wham. The kids give me a lot of inspiration, yeah. Just looking at those kids is like a trip. I have to pick them up every 5 minutes. I just look at them, they look at me, everything's like cool. It gives me a secure feeling. Yeah. Good hit. 1, 2, 3, swing. 1, 2, 3, swing. 1, 2, 3, swing. 1, 2, 3, swing. Yeah.
Wow. I thought you didn't have much of a batting average in high school, though.
Yeah, 169.
What position in the field did you like to play?
Center field.
Favorite Beach Boys album?
The Beach Boys Love You.
Favorite song you've ever written?
California Girls.
Favorite song by the Beatles?
Hey, Let It Be.
Favorite song by the Rolling Stones?
My Obsession.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's an obscure song. Favorite Jan and Dean song?
Little A for Pasadena.
Favorite Turtles song?
Eleanor.
Favorite Birds song?
Turn, Turn, Turn.
Favorite Ronettes?
Be My Baby.
Favorite Shirelles?
Happy Birthday Baby.
Favorite Carole King?
Hey Girl.
Favorite James Taylor?
I've seen Fire and I've seen Rain. Good night, oh baby. Sleep tight, baby. Good night, oh baby. Good night, baby. Good night. Sleep tight. Thank you, man.
Man, you're something else. I'm not going to forget that, Brian.
All right, John.
Okay.
Okay, man.
You're on
I
fire.
think my energy's up tonight.
It is,
I think
it's
you
great.
might bring it out of me.
Well, I like that.
I'm not usually this way, but you know, you've got me going.
You obviously have a good rapport with him, and you speak the same language musically. But I mean, I would not have been able to roll out a list of favorite groups the way you did, nor would I have been able to respond the way he did. But so how can you talk about his working with him and his well-known mental health issues?
He struggles. He has mental illness. It was covered well enough in the Love and Mercy film. Around the time I came into the picture, coincidentally, around 98, he had recently married Melinda, and it seemed that she and the team around him really got his medicine maybe right for the first time then. You know, imagine growing up and having your brothers tell you that you're just sloughing off when it's really, you know, it's really, you're incapacitated. You're having auditory hallucinations and other issues. She got him the right medicine and a lot of love, and they adopted 5 kids, and it just worked wonders on him. And he's, you know, a big, warm-hearted, funny prankster. You know, I don't know how else to put it. He's going to be 80 now.
Oh my God.
Next year.
And he has still young children.
He does. He's got, you know, his youngest is probably around 10 now, I'm guessing. And they're, of those 5, and then he's got, of course, Wendy and Carney, so he's got 7 kids, and he's got a beautiful house in Beverly Hills, and he's got a good life. But I know he's itching to get back out on the road.
Wow. Does he have a good relationship with his 2 older daughters?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do they have children of their own?
Yeah, and they're beautiful people. They really are.
That's great. He had a very hard life growing up.
It was a rough home life, for sure. But he's in a much better headspace now.
That's great.
Who would have believed that he would survive, you know, his brothers in the Beach Boys? I don't know if anybody saw the Beatles. You know, his brothers Carl and Dennis were in the group, and they're gone. And now they're talking about doing a 60th. They're doing a 60th maybe, and trying to figure out ways to do that maybe aren't quite as taxing as when they did the 50th, which was 73 shows, and it was a great show. It was a really good show.
And when you say his brothers are gone, they passed away, or they're just not in the group?
Carl and Dennis died. Dennis died in about 83, probably. Carl in about 97. The one, you know, that they thought was the most fragile has gone on. To be involved in Brian's life story and the little bit that I have and the strength that he shows to just deal with everything he does and still have that beautiful voice and play that beautiful music and show that beautiful spirit.
And that his brilliance wasn't lost amid all of that trauma.
Yeah.
And being deaf in 1 year on top of it. That's pretty amazing.
We got a Grammy nomination, I should say, that you mentioned earlier. It was for Smile. It was 1 disc of a 2-disc set. It was the live performance of Smile that he did. The other disc was a documentary that David Leaf did called Beautiful Dreamer. And it got nominated for a Grammy in 2006, but we lost to Bob Dylan and Martin Scorsese's No Direction Home.
Nancy Sinatra?
Well, Nancy, let me get her up.
You look very happy there.
Well, I'm sitting next to Nancy Sinatra. And she looks tall in this picture, doesn't she? There we go. This was 2005. Maggie McGee took this shot, but the big night was 2 years later, 2007. Brian got his Kennedy Center Award, and he had a party in Los Angeles to celebrate, and had a bunch of people over for dinner. I happened to be at her table. He got up and the band played a few numbers. I may have had a rum and coke or 2, and I asked Nancy to dance once he started playing God Only Knows. Okay? She said yes, and we danced, you know, a slow dance. And, you know, it was a tiny little place. We're right in front of Brian's keyboard, and when I had her back to him so that I was facing Brian, he gives me a thumbs up, and, you know, he was right.
John the Flair. I love it. So are you guys like still in touch?
She'd love to be, but I got so many things to do.
Yeah. You want to talk about the Dave Clark Five?
Yes, Dave Clark Five, one of my favorite British invasion bands, of course. I wanted to bring this up because this was the best live show I ever shot that is unreleased. Mike Smith, their leader, their singer, keyboard player, songwriter, their everything, made his living in the business for many years in other ways after they broke up in the mid-'70s and was very successful. Dusted off the Dave Clark Five songs in 2003, did a tour. I went to see it with my buddy Richard Buskin at the Holiday Plaza, forced my way through the stage exit. I kid you not. I'll tell you another time, but I noticed the stage door to the back. It was snowing. We were outside, and I pushed the door open. And anyway, I went in and met him and met his manager. So when he came back, I'd been in touch with Mike, and he said, yeah, bring your 6 cameras and shoot the show at the Abbey Pub. He was coming back to Chicago at the Abbey Pub, getting warmed up for a big tour the next year for a British Invasion 40th anniversary thing. So I bring my 6 cameras, meet beautiful Mike Smith, and well, we shoot the show. It was just a tour de force. Imagine Glad all over in bits and pieces and any way you want it and because and come home. Just imagine that with the original voice hitting the notes. Great story. He had another week or so on the tour. He said he would be back in touch after he got home to Spain. And 16 days after I filmed him, he had an accident at home where he fell and he injured his spinal cord, never to walk or sing or use his arms again properly. I put the tapes up on the shelf. I pulled them out recently, and it's as good as I remember it, but he suffered for a few years, and then he passed away in 2008. So it's a terribly, terribly sad story, and one of these days I'm going to do my Mike Smith film.
Wow. Wow, that's heavy. Any adventures with Frank Zappa?
Well, you're picking the good ones, I'll tell you. Yes, I hope Art Collins is on the line. He was in California on his honeymoon in probably the late 70s. You know, I follow my guitar player everywhere he goes. Somehow I found myself in LA, and, you know, I called him. I had the audacity to call him up and ask him if he wanted to go find Frank Zappa's house with me. So he said yes, and his beautiful bride, Pat, said she'll come along. So got in the car. We knew he lived in Laurel Canyon. Didn't know where to look. We were getting desperate. I even went to the fire department and asked them if they would tell me. And of course, they almost arrested me. So then we saw this kid hitchhiking. We said, hey, do you know where Frank Zappa lives? He says, yes. We have him drive by. It was on Woodrow Wilson Street Boulevard in Laurel Canyon. That's the house. I was, you know, my friends told me about it. So we drove him to where he was going. We have a tape. We have a cleaning lady's tape, of course. We start going. It's this long, steep driveway. You can't even see where it leads. Art, our guitar player, who's truly the Zappa disciple, his knees are buckling. He's saying, oh, do we really have to do this? It's so hot. He's so worried he's going to meet his idol. You know, that's when a man really shows himself, is when you're walking up another man's driveway. So sure enough, we get up this driveway. We get up to the flat spot, and there's a swimming pool. And there's a man and a woman sitting there at the swimming pool, and it's not Frank, and it's not Gail. And they say, what are you doing? And I said, you know, I said something like, we're the cleaning ladies, and we're a band, and we've walked all the way from Chicago to give Mr. Zappa a tape. Well, that cracked his wife up. She said, come in. And they brought us in by the pool. They brought us out some lemonade, and they were the next door neighbors. And they said, he lives over there, but we'll take your tape. Thank you. And we'll make sure he gets it. And, you know, we never heard back, but it was still worth doing. But you want to talk blues?
Sure.
Okay. I've been mainly focusing on the blues since about 2008, when I started making a film called Born in Chicago that's available now on Sky TV. That started because I met Tim Martin and Chris Stewart of Out the Box Records, who had a band called Chicago Blues Reunion, and that was the leaders of that group were Nick Gravenitis and Corky Siegel and Harvey Mandel and Barry Goldberg. And those were 4 of the guys who were the white guys who took the blues torch from the original black guys in Chicago and took it on to rock and roll, to summarize the story. And I said, let's make a documentary someday. And a few years later, we shot a show at Park West, and then we did make a documentary about that story. And it's been through some changes since I handed it off. It's now co-directed by Bob Sarles, and you can see it. Then we did. Then Michael Prussian, the executive producer, said, let's make a movie about Sam Lay, the black blues drummer that is a big part of Born in Chicago and who still lives in Chicago, and he's 86 now, I guess. So he, along with Star Sutherland, who produced it, we made a movie called Sam Lay in Bluesland. And do you want to see that trailer?
Yeah.
You carried a gun, right?
A gun. I had 2 pistols in my lunch bucket at school.
If you want to know about the history of the blues, Sam Lay is the guy to talk to. He knows it because he was there.
He's not just sitting there keeping time. He's like part of the song. I mean, he would help paint the song.
Playing with people like Little Walter and Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and then Paul Butterfield and being part of Bob Dylan's music, that's 5 careers.
He's got a certain style all his own. He doesn't just bring drums, he brings Sam Lay.
He was the first guy in Chicago with a Beatles haircut, black or white.
Yeah, Sam is a real showman. You know, he comes complete with cape. Every time we do a gig, he's wearing this amazing suit, like this bright pink suit, and always has a cane.
Sam Lay was my original, I want to be him.
I've had to play all kinds of different styles of music, and when I play the blues, I want to sound like Sam Lay. I want to feel like Sam Lay. I want to be Sam Lay at that time, period.
You don't necessarily need to believe everything Sam tells you.
Hey, Sam, don't never stop playing, man. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm James Cotton, and I said so, and I mean it.
He's a very flashy dresser.
He has a style, and Iggy said he based his style on Sam's. Iggy was a drummer first, you know, and he also based his shuffle drumming on Sam's, but mainly he based his sartorialness on it.
Iggy Pop, I think of a skinny guy without a shirt, but.
And that's what he was when we got to his place in Miami, but then he became a skinny guy with a shirt, and he was really, you know, he was really funny. That film you can find at samlayinbluesland.com. It's on most of the streaming services. You can find it on Amazon Prime. And, you know, hats off to Mike Prussian and Star Sutherland.
Okay, great.
And then I mentioned Paul Butterfield, seeing him at the Atlantic City Pop Festival. I got a call from Corky Siegel, and that's a show in itself sometime, but he's the thread who goes through all these blues films. And he said he knew of a woman in New York who was wanting to make a film about Paul Butterfield. And it's a woman named Sandy Warren, a retired lawyer who loved Paul going back to the mid-'60s at the Cafe A Go-Go.
She's listening as we speak.
Oh, is she? Good. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Lane. And, you know, for better or worse, she ended up with me. And thanks to Corky. And we interviewed everybody for that film. I wish I had the list, but that's what we did Bonnie for, of course, and Nick Gravenitis and Maria Muldaur. And it had a great theatrical run in 2017 and 18 and was released in 2019 by Gravitas Ventures. It's available on all the streaming services also.
Okay.
In my opinion, Butterfield is the finest blues harmonica player in the world.
I was born in Chicago, 1941. I was born in Chicago, 1941.
came from the south side of Chicago where it was about, I'll kick your ass. To see a mixed band, there were some near physical confrontations with Butterfield because he would get in people's face. You know, they would vibe us or they'd make a comment. So he really stood up for what he believed in.
And to be on stage with him, it was like a hurricane. The sound was ferocious. It was my introduction to the idea that it's better to reach for something and miss it than just to hold back and play it safe.
Paul took harmonica playing to a whole new level, and it stuck. And until the day it still sticks.
Oh, I mean, the authenticity was just astonishing. And I think that Paul was an incredible creative spirit and always kept stretching, you know. I mean, as deep as he would go into the roots, he was always pushing the envelope of what blues could be. And I loved his singing as much as I loved his harp playing. You know, he's cute, too.
Wish you were here.
The link for the Horn from the Heart film is hornfromtheheart.com.
Before we wrap up in a couple of minutes, do you want to talk about Smell-O-Vision and the Manhattan Transfer?
Yes, Smell-O-Vision. Tammy Bernstock, a wild woman from Australia.
She was on the call, but she was on the webinar, but she had to get off. But.
Oh, well, it's probably all hours of the morning there, isn't it? But I heard she was making a film about Smell-O-Vision, the system that delivered synchronized scents to theater goers and came out in the 60s that I'd heard about and thought, man, that's a great theory. Why not? Well done. Why wouldn't scent work? A whiff of something here to give a clue and a whodunit, or a puff of cigar smoke or whatever. There's just ways you could do great things with it. And she wanted to make a film. Well, she needed some help shooting a scene for that film. It was with the great photographer Art Shea, the photojournalist who happened to cover the world premiere of the Smell-O-Vision film that came out in Chicago in 1960. So I went and shot Art, and then we went on with her leading the way to make the world's first or second scented documentary about the invention of Smell-O-Vision by the Swiss osmologist Hans Laub. He's this swashbuckling guy who loved women and gambling and, you know, invented the system, had the good fortune to meet Mike Todd. They wrote a film for Smell called Scent of Mystery. It should have been a hit. Elizabeth Taylor was in it. She was Mike Todd's wife at the time. It was directed by Jack Cardiff, a famous director. It was a flop due to circumstances beyond Hans's control, but it was a massive flop. Of course, the press had a field day with it. The technology was, you know, banned to obscurity from that point on. Well, Tammy wanted to learn more about the story and to see if it had practical applications today. So she dug up everybody involved who was involved with Smell-O-Vision, including Hans's daughter, Carmen. And I want to show you a little segment where she talks about the smell brain, which is where these smells come from, and they puff out into the audience. And, you know, you got to see it to believe it.
Smell-O-Vision. It was really a bad idea whose time had come. I was just a local freelance photographer, and life used to use me a lot for different stories. This one had an element of humor that they thought I would be able to deal with. And they were right. The opening was 1960. It was a Chicago opening to be attended by Liz Taylor. You'd have to treat an audience with all of this chemical stuff. Nobody knew if it was harmful or not. And everybody was talking about it as if it were a viable thing. And the inventors of the process, whom I've pictured down in the basement, piping up orange blossom scent over the audience's face, you couldn't help but wish that James Joyce was there to get all this down.
was a very elaborate system where you had to fit an entire theater with a special blower and miles of tubing that went up behind every other seat. So it was locally delivered, which got rid of the issue of stinking up the whole theater. You delivered a small amount, relatively close to the audience nose, and it would dissipate.
The center of his smell-o-vision concept was the smell brain. He manufactured the first one by hand. There were a few. It has a sort of a look like something you would see in the Jetsons cartoons. And I actually have what I think is probably the last remaining one of these in my apartment. So here we have the remaining half of the smell-o-vision unit. We're not quite sure if this was actually used in the film itself, but it's the one that demonstrates what the thing actually looked like, or what most of it looked like. It is now our treasure. And if you look on that side, you'll see there's an area where a large hose would be inserted to pump air through. And that would make all these nice toys down here go round and round and round, bringing up the pressure to rotate this table that had all the bottles in it. All the different scents would be in here. And I think you could tell the pressure of what was happening up here with these gauges. This is the smell-o-vision unit, such as it is, representative of the one of its kind.
It's a fun film. There are a bunch of scents that are distributed at the right time as you watch our documentary. We've gotten into the Doc Utah Film Festival, so there'll be a full scented treatment there in November. We did a premiere of a section of it at the University of Chicago last March. And as COVID loosens up, there are going to be scented screenings all over the world. I think Tammy is really leading that charge. And we're doing private scented screenings now, too, for people who are interested. So go to our website, which is inglorioussmellovision.com.
What about Manhattan Transfer?
Manhattan Transfer. Well, what a band. Started out the current incarnation started out in 73, kind of handpicked great singers by the leader, Tim Hauser, from all different walks of life. They came up through the club scene in New York, the underground scene, CBGBs, Trudy Hellers, had a big gay following, got a big break when they got their manager, Aaron Russo of Chicago, the former owner of the Kinetic Playground, who got them a great television show, and they basically skyrocketed to fame from there. And but it hasn't been smooth sailing. They have gotten ripped off a lot. It's as you can imagine, they've been together. It'll be 50 years next year. There have been hardships, and they have got, besides incredible singing chops, incredible strength to have stayed together this long. So it's been fun to work on, and we hope to time the release with their 50-year anniversary box set that Concord is putting out next year. And they're still packing them in. They were here a year ago, weren't they, at the City Winery? Had 2 sold-out shows, singing beautifully. It's really an amazing story, and I have learned a lot about them just by doing this. We don't have time for the clip of that film, right?
Well, you have over 100 people hanging in there, so.
I'd love to show it because
okay, go for it.
We're very proud of it.
When I first heard Birdland by Weather Report from that iconic record, Heavy Weather, the first thought that struck me was, this is a pop record of the future.
5,000 light years from Birdland, but I'm still preaching the rhythm. Long gone up tight years from Birdland, and I'm still teaching it rhythm. Years from the land of the bird, and I am still feeling the spirit.
When I was auditioning, they played Birdland for me, and what do you think about singing this? I went, be amazing.
Bird named it, Bird made it, Bird heard it, then played it, well stated. Birdland, it happened down in Birdland.
I saw it as an extension of some of the more traditional vocalese that we were doing. The chorus is eminently singable. I started arranging the chorus, and then there were these incredible solos from Wayne Shorter and from Joe Zawinul. We had commissioned Eddie Jefferson to write the lyrics to Birdland. We got the very, very sad and tragic news that he had been murdered outside of Baker's Lounge in Detroit, Michigan, after a gig. So we went to the obvious next choice, I think, which was to call Jon Hendricks. John just, bam, whipped out those lyrics.
And he called me up and he said, I've got a lyric. I said, fantastic. I said, where are you? He said, I'm in Beverly Hills. I said, well, Janice lives near the Hollywood Bowl. I said, we're going to rehearse today at 3 o'clock. He said, I can come down around 5. I said, we'll be there.
Down them stairs, lose them cares. Where? Down in Birdland, total swing. Bob was king there. Down in Birdland.
Went to the Grammys that year. Janice won for a vocal arrangement of Birdland, and we won for jazz vocal for Birdland that year.
Manhattan Transfer, Birdland.
It was amazing for many reasons, obviously, but it was their first Grammy, too. So we were all doing something for the very first time together. This took us collectively to another level.
That'll be a good one. When do you expect to finish it?
I think by the end of the year. It's a collaboration with Miles Mogulescu, who brought me into it, who's the co-director. And we've been collaborating with the band too, and I think we're going to have it ready by the end of the year.
Thank you so much. This has been a really fun afternoon. So interesting. You have such great stories. And you haven't lost that, I guess, boyish excitement meeting and working with these famous people, and yet you're able to still work with them as peers and get interesting stories and recollections and music from those conversations, which is really a talent.
I feel like I need to pinch myself, for having met all of them, and everybody has turned out just to be a regular person without exception. Let me play a Brian clip to close, can I?
Sure, absolutely.
I want to play the first thing we ever did together. It's the open of our first film, Brian Wilson on Tour. It's when the exuberance of his getting his life and his career back, or not back, getting his solo career on track was just happening, and it was so much fun. And watch this.
While you're queuing it up, thank you, Abidor Evanston. Thank you, everyone, for hanging in here and listening to all these stories. And I will include a lot of links in the follow-up email. Lots of wonderful, positive comments for you, John. People have really, really enjoyed hearing all your stories, and it's been a lot of fun. So
good. Thank you very much for inviting me.
When I saw the announcement in the newspaper, I literally stopped breathing for about 30 seconds.
It's something I have to do. It's like if Picasso were around, he'd go and find a way to go see him.
It's timeless, it's priceless, it's spiritual.
He is pop music today.
Thank you for producing such amazing music to listen to all over the world.
You want some good vibes? You want some really good vibes? You want some good vibrations? All right.
The show is very much about my life. I wanted to be able to share my life from birth till now, and I think I've done that.
He's like Mozart or Chopin or something, like Beethoven or something. This music will live forever.
Brian, keep creating, keep going. It's so important.
I love him so much. I just do. It's just terrible. I find it hard to live with.
Yeah, let's try this then. The great Brian Wilson.
I had butterflies in my gut, and I was like scared to death to go on stage, but I just said, God damn it, Brian, let's do it.
Think she forgot all about the library like she told her old man now. And with the radio blasting goes cruising just as fast as she can now. And she'll have fun, fun, fun till her daddy takes the T-bird away. Fun, fun, fun till her daddy takes the T-bird away. Well, the girls can't stand it cause she walks slow. She drives like an ace now. You walk like an ace. She makes the Indy 500 look like a Roman chariot race now. You look like an ace. A lot of guys try to catch her, but she leaves them on a wild goose chase now. And she'll have fun, fun, fun till her daddy takes the T-bird away. Fun, fun, fun till her daddy takes the T-bird away. Well, you knew all along that your dad was getting wise to you now. And since he took your set of keys, you've been thinking that your fun is all for you now. But you can come along with me, cause we got a lot of things to do now. And we'll have fun, fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. And we'll have fun, fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away. Fun, fun. Now the daddy took the T-bird away.
But that's the Brian I know and love.
He seems like a lovely man. I'm glad that he is in a good place, health-wise, mentally and physically.
Yep, he's got a lot of people around him who love him who feel that way too.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. We've had people from all over the world tune in to listen to you, John. So you have lots of friends and admirers. So I will send you all that information afterwards. It would take too long to go through all the greetings and call out, shout outs. But thank you so much, everyone. Abidor Evanson, thank you again. John, this was really wonderful.
Thank you, Wendy. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Everyone stay safe. Next week, we have a more serious discussion, but equally as interesting. And we'll be speaking with Wendy Perlman, who wrote a book interviewing refugees from Syria. I think and the bridge trembled. I'm messing up the title exactly, but it's a great book, and she's a fascinating professor from Northwestern who has a lot of firsthand experience dealing with these refugees. So it'll be an interesting afternoon. Okay, thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next Tuesday.